Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with Season 9, Episode 44 of our weekly Q&A video/podcast. If you're on YouTube, links in the description to access this on podcasting platforms. If you're on a podcasting platform, you probably know about us, BDCKR Gaming, on YouTube.
It's true.
I'm assuming that's where you started out. But anyways, we've got a couple things we want to sort of talk about briefly before we get into Injustice.
This is a part where after you'll convince people that it's worth listening to the podcast, and this is where I come with a counterpoint. It's not really a counterpoint, but I point out something that might make it worth watching, is that what we're demonstrating this week is our current challenge character, Killer Frost. She's on a bunch of different teams, and we're using it specifically with Killer Frost and Hawk Girl, and the third person has been interchangeable. If anything, you might see a variety of fights, probably 2 different teams. Maybe a third if there's enough time, if we spend enough time doing this particular video. Lots of fun. Her, like we said last week in the recap, her passive still makes her relevant, even if she's not the most powerful, even if it's only one ability. Being able to dampen power is super effective and makes a big difference. Even though Tantu Totem exists, it just makes fights a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first thing.
So that's the first thing. We got a couple things. I have one thing that I want to talk about, which is I have been trying out. I've realized recently that Netflix has games, and specifically mobile games, and they have a bunch of them. And so I've been trying out a handful of them because when I looked at them, what I realized was there were multiple games on it, both that I wanted to play, and that were on my list to buy, or that I had already played and that I liked. So there's a game called Moonlighter, which I quite enjoyed.
It almost acts like an endorsement, right? That when they have stuff that you know is good, then you're much more willing to try stuff that you don't know.
But what was really interesting about it is that when the game that I wanted to play that I hadn't played yet, specifically was Spiritfarer, which is supposed to be this really sort of cute, endearing...
Did you say Spiritfarer or Farer?
Farer. Farer. You play as somebody...
You travel through spirits.
No, so you're like the boatman for spirits, and
you're like a spirit farrier.
Yeah, you're like
not. So I'm trying to parse out how they've constructed the word, because spiritfarer is not really like a real.
It's not
word,
a real
right?
word, yeah.
Right, but like a wayfarer or a spacefarer is somebody who goes about space, goes about their way.
So you're the ferryman.
Yeah, so basically. You're the space farrier.
Yeah.
Like you ferry people, so you ferry stuff.
But I've heard it's a really touching game.
Okay.
It's kind of like a lifestyle management sim where you're building these connections with these spirits so that they feel ready to sort of pass on.
Right.
And so
they want to get off your boat.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you're sort of befriending them and getting closer to them.
Right.
And then that's the end goal for it. And I've heard that it's really poignant and cool and fun and, just a good game. And so I was looking at that, and I was like, it's free. It's on Netflix. I can play it on mobile, right? That seems like a great form factor.
Right.
And I tend to... I have trouble, right? Because obviously we like mobile games, right?
Yes.
But a lot of mobile games aren't very good. And there was a time where mobile games were, I think, a lot higher quality, or it was easier to find them. And now a lot of mobile games, and especially even looking just through popular ones, are just the same kinds of things that are meant to push the sort of psychological reward buttons in your head to make you want to play stuff. So I saw that.
Like a slot machine.
Yeah. So I saw that and I go, that's really cool. And then I looked at the reviews, and the reviews, it got a 3-point-something star. And I was like, why
Out
is
of
it...
what? 10 or 5?
5.
Okay.
But that's not good. Anything
What's
under...
good?
Anything under 4 stars tends to be pretty not so great.
Oh.
And in general, you are pretty confident a game is going to be good if it gets more than 4.5 stars. That's a bar for a clear game. So for example, Injustice on Android is 4.3 stars, and Injustice 2 is 4.1 stars.
Yeah, that
right. So
properly.
4.3, it's a solid game. Some people could really like it, and then some people bounced off of it or had glitches with it for whatever reason, right?
Right.
And so I was looking at it, and I went, why are the reviews so bad? And it turns out that there's a game-breaking glitch near the end where you just can't finish the game because one of the missions has a bug.
Right.
And there's a lot of performance issues beforehand and a lot of crashing.
Right.
And you can lose save files. And so it just turns out that it's a really bad port. And I was looking through, and the reviews for a lot of the games that I was specifically already interested in were this is a terrible port. You know, there were some comments that were like 5 stars and like, I love this game. This is like the 3rd time I own it now or whatever, something like that. And then there's a lot of reviews saying like, I can't play this at all. This is awful. And so it looks like what Netflix has done is gotten a bunch of ports of games and then not done such a good job bringing them over to mobile. And they just sort of don't fit well. And so I'm hopeful. There's some other games that I'm looking forward to trying. Before Your Eyes is supposed to be really cool, a sort of story game that's about another one about death, actually, which is that you're reliving your life after having just died. And the mechanic that it uses is it uses your camera so that when you blink, in some cases the scene changes.
Okay.
And so you get to see these little sort of windows, and you're holding your eyes open as long as possible so that you can see more of it. You want to sort of like sink deeper into it, and it's supposed to be really engrossing, but it's it has some like real like ephemerality to it, right? Where eventually you have to blink and eventually you have to move on from the scene, and so that's supposed to be really cool. And that has a little bit better reviews. But I want to talk about 2 things, which is one game that I liked and one game that I found really weird and could not play, because I've been kind of sort of challenging myself to go through these and see how I feel about them.
Right.
Just because I have a little bit of free time around the holiday season. I'm taking a little bit of time off. So one game, which was I've been actually enjoying so far, is called Desta. Desta.
Desta, okay.
Desta. Yeah. And so it's really interesting. It is a grid squad-based tactics game. Kind of like, XCOM, and that style of game where
I don't know what XCOM is.
So the idea is that you have turns and actions, and you're trying to position your guys around the field and take out all the enemies without taking too much sort of fire yourself.
Right.
And so it's like it's a little bit of a stripped down version of that, but it's sort of...
So when we say turn-based, that means you don't have to be really fast. Like your reaction time doesn't matter.
No, you have like an infinite amount of time.
Right.
And so for a lot of that style of game, like the tactics combat sim game, is that you get to sort of just aim at and then select who you're trying to fire at, and you get it as a straight % chance of hitting them, and then sort of like a damage range. And they'll have different modifiers, like if they're behind partial cover or complete cover or whatever else, right?
Right.
And that part is kind of passive. You're just selecting decisions to make and then seeing how they play out. But this game is a little bit different because it is a game about a non-binary person returning to their hometown and in their dreams confronting sort of unfinished conversations that they haven't had, and sort of the ways that their relationships have changed with the people in their hometown and coming back to it. And so that's already kind of interesting. But the actual gameplay mechanic, instead of just having that % chance and a random thing, what it is that you're walking over to and picking up balls off the ground and then throwing them, and the balls are physically simulated to bounce off walls and stuff. And so you're trying to fling the balls at the enemies, and you and the enemies are both working with the same pool, so when you throw them, you're trying to like bounce them so that they not only hit them but then like land further away,
like dodgeball,
or knock them back into your hand. Yeah, it's kind of like dodgeball. And you can kind of camp and sit on a little pile of balls so that they can't go over and take them from you and stuff like that. So it's interesting in that sense. And it's not... The other thing is that it's a roguelike, which means that every time you die, you start over again.
Okay.
And there's some sort of light progression elements where you can start getting upgrades, and you can keep... If you play with a power, you can keep the power and choose it in all future runs instead of just sort of getting them randomly as you play. And you can level up you and your teammates so that they have like a little bit better stats and go a little farther per move. They have a little bit more health, stuff like that. They get an extra secondary ability. And so, that seems like right up my alley because I loved XCOM. And the other thing is that, it's kind of a cool story. There's a lot of sort of lavish animations. It's really well done for a mobile game, right? The main issue is that you have to keep playing through the story over and over and over again when you die. And so the story doesn't change. And, roguelikes like Hades manage that balance a lot better of making the story happen organically and not feel stale, even though you're repeating ostensibly like the same content over and over again. The way that they wove the narrative in was really sort of well done. But so the weird part about this is the only game on the list. There's some games that I think are mobile exclusive, and Netflix exclusive. But this is the only game on the list that I think is specifically not mobile exclusive. It's coming to Steam. It's releasing on other platforms soon. But it released here first. And so right now, it is only available on mobile and only through Netflix.
Right.
Which is weird. And it's it feels like a bigger game. It's, it's voice acted, there's animation, it's really sort of like...
That's been the Netflix sort of progression model, right? So that for the longest time,
yeah,
their sort of thing was to give you access to other people's content.
Yeah.
And then in the part that we all know better is, the content, the movies and the shows and stuff that they, later in their life cycle,
are making themselves.
They've become more of a studio where part of the appeal is the exclusive content.
Mm-hmm.
Although this is different because they're actually shifting. I mean, I guess it's an accelerated life cycle because if anything, how long have they been making games available? It doesn't feel like that long.
It hasn't been very long at all. It feels very new to me. But
so they've adopted that part of their business model a little more quickly.
Yeah. So it feels really strange to me. That's kind of like a measured recommendation. If you're looking for a new game and you have Netflix, Desta is like, I would say definitely good enough to try because it's $0, right?
Yeah.
But the other thing, and I'm going to try to do this a little bit quicker because I know we want to get to questions.
Well, I want to get to a couple other things too, but
but the other thing is there's this dating show called Too Hot to Handle, and they made a dating game based off of the show. And they have...
Like a mobile game you're talking about based off the show.
And they have styled it after... There are these genre of ads for story-based, choose-your-own-adventure sort of mobile games that are... And I don't know how else to say this, but they're highly, erotically charged. And the appeal of the ads clearly for, kids or teens or whatever to... go, oh, that's like a little sort of, I don't know, a little racy. Yeah, that's a good way of referring to it, because it'll be the kind of thing it'll be like a freeze frame of a girl bursting into a room, and there's a guy on a couch kissing another girl, and it goes, I can't believe you would cheat on me, and then there's 3 options, and one is that's it, we're done, and the other one is get out of here, and then the other one is what if we all kissed, right? And then that one is sort of flashing, and then
Okay, so they're leaning on the raciness.
Yeah, and then I haven't played these games, but my understanding of them is that they make you watch 1 million ads to continue through the story.
Right.
And then sometimes they'll have those options, which are the reason clearly that they're trying to get people to download the game in the first place. And those will be locked behind the premium version or whatever.
Right.
And so it's weird that they've taken one of their sort of popular shows and they've made a game styled in the format of those sort of spam games. But because, it's a Netflix model, everything's free, they're not locking anything behind you. And behind a wall, right? They're not taking anything from you. And I played a little bit of it, and what I couldn't get past is I had to stop pretty quick. Because it wasn't even that I got to anything, inappropriate or whatever. It was just that it was so long, and there was so much investment in what felt like such vapid, empty,
so little payout.
Nothing. But so the format of the show is supposed to be that you're supposed to focus on emotional connections with people, and you're not supposed to do the sort of physical stuff. And I think the pitch of the game on the page was that you could win or lose. And I found it really weird because it was all the trappings of the show,
right? And
it was all the gameplay mechanics of these really sort of spammy mobile games. And I know that clearly a lot of effort into writing and building this stuff had to be done. Right? You can't really do this stuff with no work, right? And they've made some effort to sort of give it some veneer of quality, but it feels so empty and not fun, and just you're clicking through options, and there's 3 options, and am I going to be flirty with you, or am I going to say something a little bit naughty, or am I just going to be nice or whatever? And it just...
Speaking of not fun, you know what that made me think of that we hadn't planned on talking about?
What?
Christmas Stories Christmas. How, so you're talking about a game that's based on a particular intellectual property, IP, and it seems to be missing out on the part that made the original IP any good. And I feel like that describes perfectly what Christmas Story Christmas was like.
You mean the sequel to A Christmas Story, the movie.
Because it took some of the superficial trappings of it with the voiceover, and they even had the kid come back as a dad now.
Yeah.
And it was one of those few movies that I did not finish.
Yeah.
Because it was just it felt like so much work. Even just lying there watching it felt like so much work, and that they missed every single thing that made the previous movie good while trying to imitate it in a way that was superficially there, and it had the actors, it had the name, and
they did add as much exactly the same as possible while missing like everything that actually gave it like heart and made it good and entertaining.
Very disappointing.
Yeah, so that's how I kind of feel about that game, which it just feels like they've smashed one of their popular shows together with this genre that is, I don't even know if it is popular on mobile. I'm assuming it is because I see ads for it, right? I'm assuming that because
it's got money. I don't know if it's popular.
Because they have enough money to show a million ads for it, that there's clearly somebody who's clicking on those ads and downloading it.
But I don't think business models work like that anymore, because a lot of times what pays for the ads is not income from the game, but investors who, or somebody with deep enough pockets that they think it's going to pay off at some point. And that's been the way companies that have an unsustainable business model work. Like, for example, Uber. I've read sort of analyses that talk about how the only way Uber could be financially successful independently as a business without angel investors and venture capitalists coming in, that they will replace all public transit and that there are no buses and it's all Ubers, which is not happening.
Yeah, but I feel like for those like scammy sort of mobile games, I feel like those kind of do just make their money. I feel like they have a huge ad campaign and they send out a million ads, and then the way that they make their money back is by making you watch like an ad every 10 seconds you play.
But maybe the people who are paying for the ads are very much like those investors. They don't know that they're not getting full value for the money, because the association between the game and the ads is a negative one.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not like it's not like, say, Super Bowl ad where people are excited about seeing those ads. People are frustrated. They see the ad and they associate
it's annoying
advertiser. Yes.
Yeah. But so the point is basically that Netflix has a bunch of games. They vary wildly in quality. A lot of them seem like they would be good if they are playable for you.
Right.
But the ports seem like they're not that good. So it's like this weird balance of things where they clearly have spent money and effort and stuff, but it feels like they've kind of done a relatively shoddy job of actually putting it all together into a package that would add any sort of value for me.
Right.
So I've been having some fun with it, and some of it's just, it's been very sort of confusing on a meta level of what their strategy is, what they're trying to do. And the jury is out, because I found one game that I've liked with it, and for $0, for no investment, we already have Netflix. So far it's, been worth it, just because it's any value for no extra cost, right? But I'm having a hard time sort of seeing what the point is if they're not going to put work into sort of making the stuff like playable and fun and like worthwhile for people to like invest time and effort into. And then some of it just feels really vapid and empty and like crap.
So I don't want to leave it on that note. I mean, we've been going at it non-injustice stuff for a while now, but I wanted to, one thing that I didn't plan on talking about, and this is more of a palate cleanser, is I've read a bit more recently. I've been getting away from reading for a while. Kings of the Wild is a fun fantasy novel. Not particularly deep, not doing a lot of things new, but it's a fun fantasy, and it reminds... I don't want to...
Is that the one about music where it's
like where
80s themed or whatever?
Oh,
or
no.
70s themed music?
No, it's that... It's Dungeons and Dragons kind of stuff with, magical animals, warriors and stuff, but instead of like bands of mercenaries are literally like bands. They're like rock stars. Yeah. And that whole sort of social, the social underpinning, I guess, of the society where they're like rock stars, but they're in a time where people know about the ones that the mercenaries or the fighters that had something really invested and did really big things. Yeah. Now we're in an age where people aren't doing that because there's not much to do, and they're doing it sort of more for show than anything else. And it feels like it's an interesting take on it. And I don't want to insult the writer, Nicholas Eames, because I really enjoyed it. Yeah. It reminds me of the best things that I liked about Piers Anthony's Xanth series, which got really tedious toward the end, but started off really fun. And this captures that fun really well without being as goofy about the puns. And it's got a sense of joy and got a sense of humor that a lot of people have trouble getting right. And he got it really right.
That's
Lots
good.
of fun. Kings of the Wild. Wild is spelled W-Y-L-D.
Okay.
Yeah.
So some more media recommendations.
Oh, speaking of media. So last week we talked about Knives Out, Glass Onion. And the one thing so I struggled a little bit with this because we had a discussion about this before.
Yeah.
About how to phrase it in a way that did not have the negative connotations associated with it. But it was one of the things that I feel like I forgot to mention about what was so fun about it was that it gave a really interesting commentary sort of demonstration of how we, in real life, it's very easy when we watch people who are very rich and successful make mistakes. And there's lots of people that are willing to assume that they have some higher level of strategy. That means these mistakes aren't really mistakes, that they, sort of like Pee Wee Herman, I meant to do that. When in reality, there's as a simpler explanation where they're just making mistakes. And the reason why it doesn't cost them anything, it doesn't hurt them, is because they have lots of privilege, whether that privilege is money, whether that is position, whether that's
like the support
fame.
of other people in positions
of power. Yeah. Exactly. So it was interesting because it was a really, as a human, as us people, as a group, we all like to hear stories about things, and we can relate to stories much better than we can to, I think, just hard data.
Yeah.
And it's neat seeing that kind of story where it illustrates really well the point that people, that isn't as obvious to people, that privilege makes a huge difference in your success and whatever outcomes you get.
And I do, one of the things that I found fun about it was that there was a lot of really sort of clear criticism of certain types of people and celebrities and powerful people. Like, oh gosh, what's the name of the former wrestler who he was in Guardians of the Galaxy?
Dave Bautista.
Dave Bautista plays a really sort of fun character, who's like a huge jerk, and he's styled a lot. And this is like a spoiler for like the first like 5 minutes of the movie. You see this right when you first introduce him, and it's very clear the kind of guy he is immediately.
Yeah.
But he's like one of those like alpha male, like manosphere,
right.
Andrew Tate, Steven Crowder, Alex Jones types.
Men's rights activist
guy.
Yeah.
And it was really funny to just see right away. And because I hadn't seen the original Knives Out, I didn't know sort of what the framing was. I didn't know, that it was going to be so kind of, I don't want to say overtly political, but I think it was pretty political.
Oh, 100%. But I also think that very few things, it's almost impossible to be completely apolitical about stuff.
I think it's impossible to be apolitical, but I think this was there's a lot of very clear political statements in this.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally into it. Yeah.
More than, I think, a lot of media that isn't, about sort of politics more, right? I think and I think this one ended up being actually a lot about sort of the politics of power and fame and money.
100%.
And resources. And so, but it was just very funny instantly to see what I think is like a pretty good, like, parody, a pretty good satire of these, like, YouTubers and like influencers, like the Manosphere guys. And I was like, okay, I could get into it very fast when I saw that, because I was like, it was a very fun portrayal, and it managed to be like very sort of clear and pointed,
without being overbearing.
Yeah,
like it was able to keep its sense of humor while still poking a lot of fun at different people. Yeah,
and it was a very fun movie.
Yeah,
I'll say for what that was.
Yeah.
Anyways, we'll answer at least one question.
Yeah,
I think.
A good one.
So our first question of this week is from Cameron107. They say, thanks for taking the time to answer my question. I'm still confused about certain parts and had to re-listen to this episode a few times, but I think I understand it a whole lot better now. My biggest question was whether or not the splash damage absorption worked when tagged out or not, so thank you for clearing that up. But now I'm wondering if that absorption is additive for other damage reduction effects like Batman Ninja Helmet or New 52 Shazam or not, because if it does, you could theoretically reduce all splash damage. by 100%. And so this is sort of continuing our conversation yesterday.
Yeah.
Or sorry, not yesterday, last week.
Yeah. So I'm
about gear. Do we want to?
I can't say for sure. I'm pretty certain that splash damage taken is not affected by gears, like in terms of reducing it. And the best way to know, and I should probably pay attention, is that you can look and see the splash damage numbers on screen. So that's one of the settings in the game. You want to make sure that you don't remove that so you can see what the numbers are. So they should tick off the same for teammates unless Brandished Ninjato is involved.
Yeah, and so just to be clear, we are continuing the conversation last week, if anybody didn't listen to that, about the gear Brandished Ninjato specifically.
Right. So, and my memory could be failing me, but I know that certain times I've made mistakes, but in this case I'm basing it on what I have a specific memory of, is Red Lantern Hal Jordan in the fights where we had him with an invulnerable loadout. I remember still being affected by splash damage.
Yeah.
And again, I could be wrong, but that's what I'm working with. And I think an example, maybe not an example, this would be Astro Harness, where I guess you have invulnerability to 100% health, right? Mm-hmm. It doesn't start until you're on the screen, I guess, because we know that a good strategy getting rid of somebody with Astro Harness is just splash damaging them out of existence. But that's not the same because it's not damage reduction, it's specific invulnerability, which is probably not the same. But that's sort of I'm trying to come up with examples where I remember, and Red Lantern Hal Jordan was the best one, and I could even be remembering that wrong.
You're kind of like trying to triangulate the information.
I am, but I really should, this is an answerable question.
Yeah.
We really should, all we need to do is bring in somebody with complete invulnerability, let somebody do a bunch of splash damage on us. It just involves more work right now than I was prepared to make, because what I'm trying to do is, at least with this video you can see, is make a really good team with Killer Frost, where she isn't just there as a support character, and she participates and she makes significant contributions to the fight. And I think this particular loadout, if you're watching it, and this particular team setups, because there's at least a couple different teams, works really well with her.
Yeah. So there we go.
I'd like to do the next question if you don't mind.
Let's do it, yeah.
But it's again, Cameron 107.
Mm-hmm. Lots of good stuff. I think we got a good back and forth.
Yeah.
So they say, AO Deathstroke is an old card, but with his passive, his total damage should be just over 100,000 when max augmented at Elite 10. Even with power creep, that's one of the highest damage stats in the game. I could be wrong, but as far as golds are concerned, I think only Injustice 2 Superman has more, because I know for a fact that Flashpoint Batman's damage caps out at 99,000. And bear in mind that almost half of Deathstroke's damage stat is hidden by the matchmaker, so he'll be facing much weaker opponents in comparison. We all know how good his Special 1 is, since it can automatically crit and be unblockable thanks to his passive if you time it right, but he also has a great Special 2 that is quick and does multiple hits. And if paired with Arkham Harley, his Special 2 has a 50% chance to be unblockable on each hit, so it'll have a 98.4% chance of breaking a block by the time you get to the last hit. And of course he can be saved by Arkham Knight Batgirl. I definitely agree that Arkham Knight Batman is still better, but I would say Arkham Origins Deathstroke is the second best specialist / carry in an Arkham team. And considering the former is locked behind a paywall for newer players, Deathstroke is a really good alternative.
So there's a few interesting points. One of the things I wanted to do, and why I wanted this week, was because the work I did on this question was looking at the idea. Because when you say that there's a 98.4% chance of breaking a block by the time you get to the last hit, 100% true. Except that number sort of hides a little bit what the overall impact it's going to be, right? Because there's going to be potentially a number of hits before that were blocked.
Yeah.
So here was an interesting sort of partial analysis that I did.
You did some math.
I did some math, but it wasn't so much the math as it was the breaking down and conceptualizing the problem. I think which is a lot of what using math is being able to ask the right question. So you have 6 hits. Each hit has a 50% chance of being unblockable even if the opponent is blocking. So you're assuming that the opponent is blocking. So 6 hits, 2 to the power of 6 is 64. That means out of 64 different scenarios, if they all are the different possibilities, only one of those 64 scenarios will you still be blocking at the end of it if you start off blocking. And that is interesting because you really hit like 90% like before the 6 hit. And there's going to be a bunch of hits before that you were still blocking potentially. So what I did was I created a grid that was 64 by 6 and just filled it in for each scenario, working backwards from the 6 where 1 would have been blocked and 63 were unblocked. And then each round before, you double the number of blocks so that you have 64 scenarios at the beginning where 32 are blocked and 32 are not.
Yeah.
And as it turns out, that out of those 384 sort of potential hits over a series of 6, that 63 would be blocked, 321 are not, so that you're really blocking just under 20% of the hits overall. Excuse me, when you take into account all the scenarios. That means special blocking reduces damage by 50%. So in a regular non-block breaking situation, you're reducing the damage by half. And in a regular, and that doesn't take into account crit chance, actually, crit damage. Yeah. And in the no block breaking, you're only reducing damage by about 10% on average. So it's the difference between taking 50% damage or 90% damage if you remember to block. Now, the part why this is only like a superficial look at it is that on a blocked hit, even if it's a block breaking hit, there's a much reduced chance of crit damage. So,
and there's sort of one more level, which is that you can have gear that increase the percent damage when you block, right? So the default is 50%. And so you end up dealing like on average 90% of the damage instead of on average 50% of the damage. But if they have gear, that swing is a lot greater. You know, maybe instead of blocking 50% of the damage, you're blocking like closer to like 70, 80, whatever. And so that's like a huge swing. And, you know, obviously that also complicates the math more too, because then you're not, you know, blocking on average 10% of the damage. You're blocking some amount more than that, right? But you're on average still getting even more of a benefit out of it comparatively.
Right. So it's definitely interesting. I think the reason why, I mean, I played with Arkham Origins Deathstroke a bit, trying to take advantage of this, knowing that the matchmaking is going to be favorable. And I'm not seeing the results that I would like to see if it was making enough of a difference. And I've got a few ideas about why that might be. And I'm just sort of thinking through how to test it, because if the thing is that with matchmaking, the main advantage you have with that is right in the first fight where you're matched similarly. And the bigger advantage you'll have is when you're at the threshold. The problem is if you're making him Deathstroke Elite 10, he's at least level 50. He could be as much as level 60. And once you get to that kind of number, you're already, even if you're playing with scrubs on your team, you're facing the highest level anyways. So I think I guess I could have prepared better. I could have done the calculation for what an Elite 10 level 60 Deathstroke would contribute to the sort of, what was the number? I want to stick to what MG425 said.
It was around 125k.
What did they call it?
Cutoff?
What did they call it? Wasn't it? Because I'm used to the idea of the threat number, and that was the name that stuck in my head. But I think that you would be hard pressed to get an advantage out of that unless you kept Deathstroke really low, the rest of your team really low, and you were able to keep the team number at the threshold of where it would make a difference. And I had an idea, and it just totally went out of my head. It just Astro Harness. There we go. When you have Unblockable and you've got invulnerabilities that just trigger in the middle of stuff, or just your Green Lantern, all of a sudden you've blown 2 bars of power. You've used up a second slot in your team for Arkham Harley Quinn. And unless you geared her properly, her offensive potential isn't particularly special. She's got that boost in health and an unblockable special too, which she already had to start with, but with reduced damage to it. Then you're making it difficult. It's still, like I said, for some reason, even though in theory it should be really good, I'm having trouble unlocking that potential in a fight.
So there we go. Okay, and I think that is probably a good place to end it for the week. A little bit of that discussion.
Well, I hope whoever's listening got their money's worth with the amount of injustice content in this particular podcast. That's what I'm saying. there's not a lot of people contributing.
Yeah.
Um,
This is us holding out our hands. We've got a little tiny cloth bag. It's got a few coins. We're jingling them, and we're saying, "Do you want to give us some money on Patreon?"
I don't think we're doing that.
No, we don't. We don't need that, but we do very much appreciate all the current contributors. And right now, you know, we've mentioned before, we're probably going to call this list, but this is sort of everybody who is contributing or has contributed since when we sort of acknowledged COVID was starting and people's sort of situations were changing. So we'd like to give a huge thank you to our wonderful patrons. That is Bombo Ben, Consul Peasant, and Edwoon at the highest last word tier. Sinemac and Mohammed Albshaiti at the Your Message Here tier. Drew Chapman, Shawn Farrell, Daniel Simonson, Aaron Maule, Michael DeVries, Brandon C., Irvin Ruiz, Eddydoo, and Hoshi 127, who support us on the credited level. And Chris Wolf, Scarlet Danny, Awesome Gamer 241, Pavu RS, Gavin Malott, and Isfar E., the gratitude level. Thank you so much. Oh, I forgot. I forgot to give a shout out to Eliza.
You did. And after you do that, before we end it, I want to say something else, but go ahead.
I'd also like to give a shout out to Eliza the Rock Caton. She's the highest paid actor, and she's a former WWE superstar. This shout out was brought to you by the People's Elbow.
I don't even understand. I'm so
You know Dwayne The Rock Johnson?
I know Dwayne The Rock. I just don't understand the joke.
I'm saying Eliza the Rock Caton.
She's
Dwayne The Rock Johnson is currently the highest paid actor.
Oh, okay, because I just didn't get the joke as he is, but calling Eliza that...
I'm just saying she's The Rock.
You can just,
I can just, right. I've been doing the middle name stuff, and he's like the most famous middle name nickname guy.
And I want to point out in that list that the people who are still currently supporting us, who I want to give a special shout out to, are Drew Chapman, Michael DeVries, and Irvin Ruiz.
Okay, so is this our slow sort of fade into
I think
the
transition,
new list?
Maybe, I don't know, but part of it, and we mentioned this a couple weeks ago, but I just don't see there's this transition between pandemic to an endemic disease.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure when there's this clear sort of bright line that marks the transition, but it feels like there's, at least in terms of the international response and the way people are living their lives, that we're getting to that stage somewhere. And I don't know that it's going to be announced or that we're going to know it when it happens, but it's getting close.
I think also for us right now, you know, I think a lot of the people who, if there was anybody whose financial situation was altered in a way that they could not support us through the pandemic, I think that situation is, whatever it is now, is kind of just like the financial situation of like the world or like the country that they're in or their place. And so I think now is kind of, stuff is settled enough, right? If you're laid off, then whatever. And I think we've reached the point where the reason why we put it off has in one way or another sort of sorted itself out for a lot of people. And there's ongoing sort of repercussions of that, but there often is for big sort of economic stuff.
Right.
And so we can maybe go...
So we'll see. Yeah.
Figure it out. Anyways, thank you so much for your support. We've managed to make the topics here go out in weird ways that I wasn't going, and gotten more juice out of them. And I think I will need like the wisdom of hindsight to recognize if I was on topic and it made sense, or if it was a little more scattered this week. But thank you so much for your support, and thanks so much to all of you for watching or listening. We'll see you next time.
Komoda.